when you reckon, as it is calculated, that 97% of all the scientists who have ever lived in the history of the world since the days of Euclid and Pythagoras and Archimedes, 97% of all who ever lived are alive and at work today, you get some idea of the rate of progress we have to face. It is, of course, a cliche that we're living at a time of such rapid scientific change that our children are accepting as part of their everyday life things which would have been dismissed as science fiction a few years ago.
I think that people have to understand that choices about science and technology are every bit as important as choices about how to run the National Health Service. And I think that anything that will alert people to the importance of making sensible choices about science and technology can't but be, in the long run, very good for society.
The attitude very much was that science was a good thing. Science had helped to win the war, and science would help to win the peace and make a better world for everyone. The assumption was that scientists would tend to be truthful, honest people, unlike politicians, for example. And this did lead to a certain coziness, that's the word I would use, between producers and scientists, and a certain mutual trust, which was very important, by the way, for getting the scientists to perform in the first place.
And when the upper stick has come into the horizontal, an astonishing and dramatic thing is observed. Where do you think the ball will be? In the cap! What does that mean? Doesn't it mean that the end of the stick had to run away from the ball?
Yes.
Because if the ball stayed on the end of the stick, the ball would be on the end of the stick.
Yes.
But it isn't on the end of the stick, therefore the end of the stick ran away from it, right?
Well, you're telling us, sure.
Of course. Come quick. Come, notice. Don't delay. We've got a week's work here. Stand right here. Right here. Hold up. There's a ball in there. I have difficulty in getting it out, huh? Here, watch me use Newton. We need a long shot now, see? Oh! There. Oh, I need that stick. Did you see what happened here? Look. Did I not keep this going? Didn't I not get this going?
Yes.
Did I not stop this?
Yes.
What did the ball do?
It came out.
Why did it come out? Because the first law has a second part which says that if a body is in uniform motion in a straight line, it wants to keep doing that. You see? So that's a, watch me. There it is.
Later on, there was just the beginning of a reaction, a beginning of a questioning. And this was not only due to, if you like, what we would now call environmentalism or anything of that sort. It was also due to people beginning to think that maybe technology was getting out of control, that things were happening that they didn't really want to happen. Their lives were being changed in ways they didn't quite understand or wish.
In our efforts to stem disease and hunger, we are spreading these toxic chemicals all over the world. Some pesticides quickly disappear after spraying. Others, like DDT, which belong to the chlorinated hydrocarbon group, may persist in the soil for several years, finding their way into rivers and streams, perhaps poisoning fish and wildlife.
Nobody loves a poisoner. It's very difficult to persuade people that the people who make and use these chemicals aren't willful poisoners. They are clever, conscientious, selective poisoners in the service of mankind.
No one really noticed exactly when the historic mistake took place. The first, perhaps, were the birds who finally flew away from the lake, which had been poisoned by man's activity. Then 12,000 birds died in a single month. And beneath the acidic waters, the fish also died as the poisoned lake lost its power to produce oxygen. Finally, the waters became dangerous even for human beings. This is the classic example, not of pollution which is reversible, but the systematic, total, irreversible destruction of the biological processes which make life on Earth possible.
I don't think it was unduly pessimistic. I mean, people now think nothing of understanding the fact that the ozone layer is being destroyed across the whole world, or that we might change the whole climate. I mean, this is a sort of accepted idea. Nobody thinks that you're mad if you say this. Back then, people thought you were off your loop if you suggested that there were these scale problems and that we might not be able to handle them and that we might have to change a great deal.
If we ever actually believed all the prophets of doom that are thrust upon us in the course of the average evening's viewing, there would be a mass exodus from the TV set to the gas oven.
The ideal view of a horizon would be the prophet Job.
To the extent that they were sort of groundbreaking, I don't think that they, at the time, were badly judged. I think people needed to be shocked and people needed to be woken up.
When the forest goes, its role as a reservoir goes too. There'll be massive soil erosion, and like the Dust Bowl, this area could also slowly revert to desert. As far as the American Forestry Service is concerned, there's only one answer.
Yes, there's really no doubt that the internal combustion engine must be phased out, and soon. There must be an ultimatum made to the automobile industry, and there are laws being considered right now which would do just this.
How soon?
By 1975, no later than 1975.
85% of the air pollution is caused by motor cars. For their own experiments, the Forestry Service preserved the only really healthy trees in these polythene houses. The ultimate absurdity. They survive by breathing artificially filtered air.
They took all the trees, put them in a tree museum. And they charged the people $1.50 just to see them. Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? They paved paradise, put up a parking lot. They paved paradise, put up a parking lot.
Some ecologists believe that only a major tragedy, perhaps the death of many thousands in a smog disaster, will finally initiate effective political action.
If you had to ask me now what the chances are of civilization reaching the turn of the century, I'd have to say 1 or 2% if we're lucky.
I would say that our chances today are about the same, 1 or 2% of reaching the turn of the century or soon thereafter in the kind of civilization that the listeners to this program would like to relate to. I think that we have gone downhill in terms of not dealing with a lot of these problems the way we should have. We have, however, since '71 gone uphill in our awareness of them. The coverage in the media and so on is much more intense now than it was in 1971 and much more sophisticated, and the environment is much more a part of our entire global society. After all, Gorbachev has pointed out dramatically that national security now lies more in the area of keeping the planet habitable than it does in the area of military security.
I think that we were certainly leading popular thought. I mean, I don't think that there were any of the ideas. I mean, again, if you take due to lack of interest, I mean, it reflected very much the views of Paul Ehrlich, which had been current for 4 or 5 years. But there's no doubt that in the way that you then handled them on television, you actually made an enormous impact with them for a general audience. And I think of a program like Whales, Dolphin and Men.
The modern whaling fleet is an armada of ships carrying out what amounts to a military operation. They use helicopters, radar, sonar, supply ships, factory ships, hospital ships, and killer birds.
Right.
Their main weapon is an explosive harpoon fired from a cannon, which explodes like a hand grenade after it has entered the whale's body.
afraid I conned the Japanese into letting me use that shot. We were sitting around a table in Tokyo, discussing how they went about the whaling, and they were running a film at the same time, one of their promo films on a big screen. And the shot came up, and it started going. The whale came up, the shot fired, and the blood spewed out all over the whale's back. It went down, and it came up, and it blew blood again. And I just sat there looking at it, and it ran for about a minute and a half. And I decided then that if I could get the shot, it would have to run that length. It couldn't go, you can't chop the shot short.
I remember most of all the scenes where the whales were killed. I mean, which had a fantastic impact because it was this blue sea and this red blood. And it went on and on and on, and it was horrible. It was the most, I mean, I can't remember anything quite as vivid that I've seen in that sort of area. You've got to remember that nobody in this country had ever seen a whale, nobody was ever likely to see a whale, and yet we were able to mobilize 15 or 20,000 people to come on a demonstration to save whales. There was one campaign we ran where hundreds of thousands of children wrote letters to Downing Street, and they wrote letters not only to Downing Street but also to the Japanese Prime Minister and to the Russian General Secretary. Now, that was very much, I think, because their access to it was through the films, and through the films that had started with this particular film.
Almost immediately, the pet foods company announced that they would stop using whale meat for pet food. But it took about a year before the government actually brought in a ban on the importation of certain whale products. And that was pressure largely due to Friends of the Earth and all the people who wrote in and wrote to their MPs and so on.
You can pick on certain individual programs that you in actual fact know have changed things, whales, dolphin and men being one of them. But there are others where you know that you haven't changed things in the way that you thought you might do. What you hope is that you're part of the drip, drip, drip process, that in fact what you've done through making those programs is simply add to the whole current in the direction of that current, the direction of the change in public view and opinion.
Hebden Bridge, a small Yorkshire town 1,000 feet up in the Pennines. This is the story of some of the people who worked here at the Cape Asbestos factory. It once brought much-needed work to a place where wages are low and unions weak. The factory building still stands overlooking the valley. It's called Acre Mill. Raymond Price once used to walk the 3 miles to his work at Acre Mill. Today, aged 51, he can neither manage such distances nor hills. He too has asbestosis.
There was legislation in 1931 that said not only was asbestos one of the most dangerous toxic substances known, but it should never escape to the air. I mean, we had a factory where hundreds of people were either dying of asbestosis or cancer.
Well, it's just like a film. You've seen snow coming down in little flakes. Well, the blue powder used to come down like that, all little bits in it. It looked like a little snowflake.
You could see it mostly when the sun rays were on, and it just floated about like silk. And it shone like silk and all.
The factory inspectorate never prosecuted during the entire 30 years that Cape Asbestos ran Acre Mill. And it claimed as late as 1965 that it was not a bad factory by the standards of the day. And when Acre Mill finally closed in 1970, Her Majesty's District Inspector of Factories wrote thanking Cape for their cooperation. Asbestos is everywhere, in power stations and old buildings. It's costly and dangerous to remove. Yet there is still no open, independent body to set safe levels and prevent this type of problem happening again with other dangerous materials. Under the new asbestos standard, on grounds of practicality, a known cancer risk has been accepted.
TV programmes in the history of asbestos have been absolutely crucial. So at each stage in the last 20 years, when you've needed political action to get the improvements that are so essential, it's TV programmes that have played this crucial role. What they do is they act as a spur to political action, but then, of course, that dies down after 2 or 3 years. The public forgets, politicians forget, and workers or others are left to continue at risk. And then another program comes along and provides another political spurt. So really they have played an absolutely seminal role in the history of getting improvements to asbestos and other agents of that sort.
Mr. Price still does not know if his disease is merely an accident or negligence, or whether it was the result of an illegal decision taken in secret not to enforce the law. The Official Secrets Act makes it difficult for anyone to find out what really happened.
The best protection is not secrecy, and there's a neurotic, still, degree of secrecy about government public decision making. And I think the fundamental issue is that the citizen is best protected when there isn't that secrecy. Clearly there has to be in questions of genuine national security. But in many of these issues, you could go to prison for taking samples out of rivers in the 70s. And even now, although there's cosmetic laws, it's extraordinarily difficult to find out exactly what is in the water you're drinking.
The fundamental problems of inadequate resources on the one hand and supine attitude towards prosecution and enforcement on the other, those two remain as problems that I hope future TV programs will address.
San Francisco, 1906. On the morning of April the 18th, an earthquake shook the city to the ground. It was all over in 60 seconds. The San Andreas Fault, a break in the Earth's crust, had ripped open, causing almost total destruction. Another similar earthquake is inevitable, and probably soon. But San Francisco is not prepared. It has ignored warnings to protect itself that come from its own scientists. It is the city that waits to die, waits for the fault line to erupt once more.
To make a film about the prediction and prevention of earthquakes, found that in fact there was a much more relevant story in that hundreds of thousands of lives were at risk simply because building codes did not reflect current knowledge about the safety of buildings. There was 5,000 children sighted in schools on an active fault trace, which in a big earthquake, most of those children will be killed.
There's no excuse for building any building on top of an active fault. If the public officials are not aware that those schools are there, then they ought to be, and if they are aware, then something damn well should be done about it.
The Adams Junior High School. There are 1,153 children in this school. It is on the fault. There are no less than 13 schools built directly on the fault trace. In them, 5,000 children. Also directly on the fault, the police department, the nerve center for disaster operations. and by the side of the police station, the Civil Defence Operations Room. And nearby, also on the fault, is the county hospital. All would cease to operate in a big earthquake. The public has not been told of the real dangers.
When the lives of 100,000 people are at stake, with an almost certain earthquake to occur within the next few decades, and when public officials, engineers, speculators refuse to listen to it, it seems to me that there is a very powerful argument that we have found a place where responsibility rests.
Runs right through
Arthur Galston, professor of botany at Yale, has sometimes referred to himself as the last innocent in science. 30 years ago, Arthur Galston became interested in the question of why a bean plant that's only making leaves and stems suddenly decides to make flowers, and hence bean pods. He discovered a chemical which would bring about this process. When put onto a plant, triiodobenzoic acid, or TIBA, would cause it to have more pods. This information was published in a thesis, available for anyone to read. Defoliating chemicals developed by defense scientists from Professor Galston's TIBA were sprayed on 8 million acres of Vietnam. Impurities that arose in the manufacture of these chemical compounds were found to cause serious ecological and public health side effects. Wildfowl and fish life in the estuaries were destroyed. Drinking water was contaminated, sufficiently to cause embryonic malformations in pregnant women. As a result, children were born with deformities ranging from cleft palates, cystic kidneys and livers, to failure of the brainstem to develop.
One never knows what's going to happen to a scientific discovery that one happens to make. When, in fact, my discovery had been used for constructive purposes, I felt very happy. It produced more soybeans to feed pigs, and therefore people. But it also had, I think, these unfortunate spin-off effects.
You got one of these, sir? It's all about science for the people. Have you seen this thing? Has anyone given you one? No, thanks. You're not interested? I haven't even explained. Have you seen this piece of literature? Oh, you have?
What do you think science and the people should do? Do you think the people care? Do you think anybody cares about anything?
Well, I know the government doesn't care. I think
care.
so. What we're trying
Every
to
now and again, I think about that, and I think, why do I put up with this cruddy system? And then I think, well, they pay me.
Now, I think anyone embarking upon an examination of the health of science, whether you're an eminent figure in science or a relatively new filmmaker, is going to get a lot of flack, a lot of criticism. And Science is Dead certainly was castigated in some quarters and applauded in others.
Those who wish to defend the BBC against the charge of being anti-scientific should explain how this disastrous programme came about.
It's not often that television scoops the other media in science reporting. Horizon pulls off this rare feat in Science is Dead, Long Live Science.
I do think that what happened with that programme was it made a very interesting analysis of the direction in which science was moving. But then I think began to offer as a series of kind of solutions to the way that scientists might behave and might take their social responsibilities more seriously. It offered very Californian solutions, if you know what I mean.
On the day that we were filming them, they were talking to a group with similar interests from India.
And instead of having this type of a pumping mechanism, just connected to a regular centrifugal pump. And if we get enough power, enough torque to run a pump, we could lift it 20 feet.
Our idea is to develop a windmill that is simple enough that anyone could put it up and use the materials that they can find where they live. So we used the transmission of an automobile because it has all of the bearings and all of the gears that we would have had to come about.
I think it would be really good to know whether it's going to destroy something.
You must remember that the part of the program which dealt with alternative technologies was done at a time, some 2, I think, years before the energy crisis. What we saw in that film were the first primitive efforts by people who seemed rather freakish at the time. I mean, the very idea that you should be concerned about where your electricity came from, that it would have to come from the wind, was something which was incomprehensible to some people at that time.
It ended, I remember, with a sequence of people on some sort of headland, with a campfire, and you know, the image was of some sort of back to nature concern for things. And I think that scientists working in the real world of science know that that is no kind of long-term answer, and there was also a kind of social reaction to the kind of way in which this kind of East Coast slightly hippie quality, which was generated by a lot of the proponents in the program, was something that people couldn't relate to and felt antagonistic towards.
These highly educated physicists are hoping to find a humble and reverential approach to knowledge as part of a mystical experience of the world. But can they do so only by betraying the traditions of science and progress on which our modern world is built?
Watch the fire. Really look and see what the fire is.
One was dealing at that time with a multiplicity of views, and science instead, long-lived science, attempted to deal with that, those views in their richness, in their breadth. And of course, what it was actually an appeal for was a change of heart in science. It wasn't saying science is dead at all.
A television producer takes the role that Stanley Baldwin attributed to the harlot, power without responsibility.
Well, the whistleblower, whether in medicine or in the environment or power stations, whatever it may be, is actually rather like the person who makes a big new discovery or has a big original idea in science. And this too can lead to criticism from the scientific establishment if, in their opinion prematurely, you publicize these ideas. And the BBC has had flack of that kind over the years too.
This woman is about to have a baby. She's had her labor induced, artificially started by the use of a hormone, oxytocin. This hormone, fed into the bloodstream throughout labor, controls her contractions up to the moment of birth. In some hospitals, over half the expectant mothers are induced. The timing and progress of their labor is decided for them by their doctor. For thousands of women, the experience of giving birth has been totally changed. In the past, mothers had their babies when they were ready. Now, the rapid spread of induction means babies can be planned to arrive on schedule when the hospital is ready.
At the time we started to think about making the program, there was a great deal of debate and discussion going on, particularly in the medical press and the specialist press, about induction.
Induction on the grounds of social convenience is a pernicious practice which has no place in modern obstetric care.
It seemed to us appropriate to make a film that examined why these induction rates were rising and to also explore some of the problems that were cropping up because of the high induction rates, the increased rates of caesarean sections, the increased rates of forceps delivery.
Can you feel that contraction? It's quite a big one. You can't feel anything at all.
One problem with epidurals is that because mothers cannot feel their contractions, they don't know when to push. So more and more induced babies have to be helped out. The risk to a baby born by forceps is small, but the more forceps delivery is being done, the more often you run that risk. And as more babies are induced, there's a greater opportunity for other things to go wrong.
Most people felt that John Radcliffe was very neatly ambushed by this program, in that the hospital was being portrayed as the sort of high intervention, high technology, with no consideration to the important emotional aspects of childbirth. And I don't think this was the case.
All our friends were ringing up from all over England saying, "What on earth have you done? Why on earth did you let Horizon into your hospital?" I mean, the Horizon became a dirty word in the hospital. We were reluctant to let any television organisation near us for years.
Dear sir, to present such subjects in an emotive and totally biased way is irresponsible and against the public good.
There was another element in it which I think was very interesting, which was some of the medics who were making the case against the widespread use of induction were people who were seen as radicals within their own particular field. And again, there was, a classic social antagonism which was actually present, which, I mean, in a sense we walked into the middle of, but nevertheless felt the edge of.
We've got carried away with technology, and that technology has now taken over. It seems to me that we've reached the days of George Orwell's 1984 in 1974, and I'm aghast at this.
All the flack came from my colleagues who said, "You are causing us an enormous amount of work. We've now got to talk to women. We've now got to tell them why we're inducing them." Well, why not? That's exactly what we meant to do with the programme, or at least what I meant to do with it. And that was the reaction that we got.
The higher levels of pain felt during induced labour forced doctors to use more pain-killing drugs. Where epidurals are available, an increasing number of these are having to be given.
Now, my finger's on your back again, Mrs. Anthony. Now a little pressure on your back, but not painful pressure.
Epidurals are local anaesthetics injected into the spine. 5 hours after she was induced, Mrs. Lindsay has decided she needs one. It's the 5th tube going into her body. 2 are feeding drips into her arm. 2 go into her womb, measuring her contractions and her baby's heart. This one will feed her with anaesthetic.
Sometimes you feel a little twinge in your back, or your bottom.
In epidurals, for example, were highly criticised in the programme. They have been a boon to women. They've enabled many women to have an enjoyable labour and a satisfactory outcome.
The day following your programme, several patients refused induction of labour. Sooner or later, babies will die.
We actually opened the film with an induced birth in which we stated quite strongly that this, in most cases, was perfectly safe, perfectly normal, and in most cases there would not be complications. But nonetheless, there were sufficient worries around for us to examine those cases where there were complications.
The sad fact of the matter is that if you do a programme which was, in the end, as powerful as that one was, that kind of rational statement is outweighed by the lingering emotional impact of the piece. And that is a problem.
I think, on balance, the programme was positive. I think it served a great purpose for women having babies throughout Britain, and I think it told obstetricians, you are accountable for what you do, and that was a very important message.
The induction rate didn't fall overnight, but within a year it had fallen in most places to at least half of what it had been.
We now recognise that we must explain to mothers everything that's happening. We shouldn't be doing anything that causes them concern. They should be given choice, and they should be involved in the decision making. And of course, in doing so, they share in the responsibility for the outcome.
I think where television is instructing or observing, and in both instances it's pretty much doing a nature programme, then like all their nature programmes, they're done very well. It's very helpful indeed in discussing with a patient what you might be going to suggest for them if they have already seen it happen on the television and know that it's a perfectly reasonable manoeuvre.
What doctors don't like is the evaluation of their work by the general public. To my mind, that evaluation is entirely justified, and the more the media push in and say to doctors, show us what you're doing, let us discuss it. I think that is a proper role for television and radio.
When the end started to become clear, and it was really a programme much more about politics and decision-making than it was about science, I wanted to have a minister in the programme, and I wanted him to be saying things which engage with the detail. I didn't want platitudes like, well, we should be keeping an eye on this and that kind of stuff. So I said to the public relations lady I wanted to meet Kaufman to explain him about the film, to let him think about it, and then I would like to interview him about 4 or 5 days later. And she said, oh, no, no, no. I'm afraid you can only see him once. So I said, but look, you know, he'll say bland things, and it won't get in the program, and the whole thing will have been a waste of time anyway. And she said, well, she said, you can't go and see him without us briefing him about these microprocessor chips. And if you then decide not to film him, that's been the waste of a briefing. So I said, look, please forget about the film. I said, the film's not important. Whatever you do, brief him. And she said, oh, no, no, she said, he's a very busy man. He hasn't got time to waste with us briefing him about these things if he's not going to be on television with it.
I think it was just before the programme was screened, sometime in February, that the Prime Minister was giving a speech to the Parliamentary and Scientific Committee, I think. And I was contributing bits to this speech, and I actually wrote in the words microelectronics and microprocessor. And he didn't know what they meant, so I was called in, and Mr. Callaghan said, you know, are these things serious? What do the words mean? Do you really want me to say them? Because, and I said, yes, they are serious. Yes, it would be helpful if you were to say them. And I know that the audience, which were, of course, largely politicians, were equally baffled. And I think that was the first time the word microprocessor was really mentioned in a political context.
The sort of senior civil servants in DTI who had been kind of interested, they'd been sort of academically interested in the fact that that we were making a film. They were devastated. They really were kind of overwhelmed to find that it just shot up the agendas of everybody. And ministers and prime ministers and so on said to their staff, why haven't you warned us about these things? Why has it been on television first? And they said, but we did. You know, it is in your in tray, it's there. And they hadn't been reading it.
I can distinctly remember Sir John Hunt, who was then Secretary of the Cabinet, and I sitting and watching it, because he was much sort of taken with it. And I particularly remember it because I got a lift in his car, and as we were coming back to the Cabinet Office, he turned to me and said something like, you know, this is really very serious. I mean, are we really going to have all that unemployment? And I was still new in the job and rather flippant, and I cheerily said, oh, don't worry, sir. I said, we'll redefine work, or something. And he was quite shocked, not sort of thing that you said to the Secretary of the Cabinet. Ever since Wilson's white-hot heat of technology had gone distinctly cold, technology hadn't been a matter of any great political interest. There had been the sort of environmental worries in the late 60s, and then Vietnam had cast a sort of shadow over it all, and technology had disappeared off the political agenda. And suddenly here was a technological thing, a microprocessor, which it was said was going to have profound social implications. This was a technology which wasn't gee-whizzery for the scientists. This wasn't toys for the boys stuff. I mean, this was something that would affect supermarkets and telephones and warehouses and packets of soap. I mean, you know, and everyday life.
It had an astonishing effect on governments. I mean, at that moment, you had a Department of Trade and Industry that was dealing with the industry. You had the NEB that was making investments. But at the senior level, at the cabinet level, we didn't really feature. You know, I mean, there was shipbuilding and important things like that. I mean, what on earth was this industry? Now, that kind of seemed to change almost overnight. I exaggerate, of course, but it seemed to. So that within a year, you had awareness programs set up, you had major involvement, major education programs started under the Callaghan government and carried on absolutely without pause by the Thatcher government, leading eventually to the even accelerated involvement in the period when we had a Minister of Information Technology, initially Kenneth Baker.
Every time we decide to have children, we are unconsciously doing a kind of natural genetic engineering. We know our children will be like us in some ways, but we can't predict exactly how they'll turn out. Imagine a world in which you could predict, or even choose, particular characteristics for your children. Why is such an idea so unsettling? For the first time, the act of conception can be observed and achieved in the laboratory. There are concerns that this may lead to manipulations on the human embryo. Manipulations are no longer confined to whole cells or their nuclei. Now, individual genes are being moved around between species, from bacterium to rabbit, from rabbit to mouse. In fact, there's nothing to stop a gene from an orange incorporating successfully into the genetic material of a duck. I think people feel a deep revulsion, which often comes out in the phrase, who are we to play God in this matter? Who are we to decide the future of the human race in this sort of way?
Here are your 6 fertilized eggs in the cryobank, 2 male and 4 female. And as you requested, Pat, they all come from your 3rd superovulation from the batch that produced Lily. And the sperm we injected them with all came from your May donation, Conrad. What sort of characteristics were you thinking of?
Well, we definitely don't want to tamper with the physical side of things in any way.
No, except that we would like her to have my father's red hair.
Oh, well, that's easy. We can make her homozygous on the 3 hair color genes. What about her character and emotions?
We'd like to reduce shyness and susceptibility to depression without necessarily damaging any autistic potential. Also, we'd like her to be musical.
Well, let's have a look at 3 and 6 then. Yes, I think we should concentrate on 3. I think 6 is going to require too much work. Well, let's see if we can make a budding musician out of her. I've had very good reports from the Chinese about a new gene cluster. Let's see if that's available. Yes, it is. Good. Now, deleting the shyness and depression without affecting the artistic ability is a bit more delicate. But you had quite a good experience with the Bash Kremko deletion with Daisy, didn't you?
Well, yes, she seems reasonably extrovert.
Do you want to have the child yourself?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Right. Well, then I'll go ahead and book your implantation appointment as soon as we can fit you in.
Thank you very much.
We need to inform our thinking today, whether it's thinking about the environment or thinking about our own personal habits like diet or smoking. All these things are informed by a belief that science is important and worthwhile. Horizon on the screen on BBC Two, combined with other science programs and technology programs like Equinox on Channel 4, give a validity to science as something that people should be interested in. It becomes the currency of everyday talk in the office or in the pub.
I think that people have to understand that choices about science and technology are every bit as important as choices about how to run the National Health Service. And I think that anything that will alert people to the importance of making sensible choices about science and technology can't but be, in the long run, very good for society.